Everybody, and welcome to my weekly Periscope broadcast. It's Shawn Casemore here on a gloomy, rainy day here near Toronto, Ontario, Canada, but nonetheless happy to see the rain. And what I wanted to talk to you about today, let me get this turned around here, was about the topic of leadership. And specifically, I wanted to talk a little bit about asking more questions, about listening more often, and about the value that that can bring as a leader. So let me just, I've got my headphones on this morning, and listening to myself in some of these broadcasts, I find there's a real echo when I'm in my home office. So wanted to try and cut down on that. So hence the headphones this morning. So here's what I had given some thought to during some travels over the past couple weeks. I've met with a lot of leaders. I've been traveling around a lot, from Atlanta to New York to Vancouver, even to Halifax, of all places. Go figure. And what I found is that those leaders at any level of an organization, whether they be frontline leaders, CEOs, executives, those folks who are, I guess, the most effective are those that speak less. And let me give you an extreme example of this. So I've known the CEO of I would say a mid-sized organization, about $100 million a year in revenue. I've known him for some time. And he's a very analytical thinker. And the benefits that that brings, so sometimes we talk about the fact that he can get stuck a little bit on making a decision. I mean, sometimes you want to think things through. Sometimes you need to act quickly. So we've spent some time talking about that and working with him. I do a lot of advising to CEOs and executives. But one thing I have to give him credit for is that because he's so analytical, that when you're having a conversation with him, there's a lot of pauses, and he never cuts you off. He never assumes something. He always asks questions to clarify. He never makes an assumption. And he always at least appears to be giving quite a bit of thought and consideration to what myself or anybody around him is saying. And so there's a lot of benefits to that. Now, I'm the first to admit, okay, I'm not perfect. I'm somewhat of a talker, hence here I am doing a Periscope broadcast. I'm a public speaker. I speak for a living. So I do a lot of speaking, and what I have to do is train myself depending on the environment I'm in. I've got to ask more questions and listen sometimes versus talk other times. But what I find, if you're a leader dealing with people, whether you're dealing with 5 people or 500 people, you're better off to defer to the latter of the two. You're better off to be someone who asks more questions, someone who gives thoughtful consideration to what people, whether it be a group of people or individuals, are saying. Think about it. Anytime something goes wrong, it's typically because you have stepped in and said something quickly, right? And reflecting back on this gentleman I mentioned earlier, in fact, because he's so analytical, because he's so thoughtful relative to what anybody is saying, that yes, there are times when he needs to pick up that pace, but more often than not, when he's thinking about what you've said, whether it be a question or a comment, you can't help but think to yourself, wow, he's really giving thought to what I said. That's good. Makes me feel good, makes me feel important. And those are the kind of things that you want your employees, your people, your team to be feeling as well. You want them not to believe that you're jumping to conclusions or that you think you know better. You want them to at least believe and hopefully agree that in fact you're considering what they're saying, you're taking it all in, and you're really giving thoughtful consideration, and if there's a word for today, that would be it, thoughtful consideration to what they have to say. So I wanted to share with you a few pointers, a few ideas that I think will help you. If you're already somebody who is fairly analytical, if you tend to ask more questions and be quiet more so than speak up and jump in, and generally you'll know for yourself, then you might find this isn't as much of a challenge for you. What I would challenge you in that case to do is, if you find you are somebody who's analytical and you take more time to respond to people, you want to think about the situation you're in. You want to be asking yourself, is this something that I should respond to quickly or not? Is this something that I should go with my gut reaction or not? And if you're unsure, ask the person you're speaking to. So here's an example. If I was an analytical person, I was slow to respond. This is kind of the counter to what we're talking about here today, but I want to give you a couple different scenarios. If you know you're that way, and typically you do, in any environment where that dialogue is going to exist, You might want to say to somebody, look, I'm very analytical. I tend to think things through. So what I'd like to do is have this conversation, and if it makes sense, give it some thought, and then let's circle back and discuss it further. Because I want to make sure I give full thought to what you have to say here. Or if you find you're mid-conversation and you can tell by the other person they're waiting for you to respond, so they're giving you that, all right, that look there. What you might want to say is, something I should mention, I don't like to jump to any conclusions. I'm a thinker. I like to process things. So I'm probably not going to respond to you as quickly as you'd like. But, don't panic. That's who I am. That's how I tend to interact. So if you're somebody who already thinks things through and you tend to not speak as much or as often as others, that's okay, but realize there's a time and a place in how you want to use that, and your best approach is to educate others on how you communicate, right? That's the best approach for anybody. Educate other people on how you best communicate. That's going to make that dialogue go much better. Now, on the flip side, if you're somebody who tends to jump in, cut people off, you get excited, you want to get through that dialogue quickly, then I want you to think about the opposite to that. Again, educate people. Somebody's talking and you cut them off, and typically I mean, that's a fault of mine. Sometimes I'll cut people off. So knowing that's the case, as soon as I do it, I realize it. I'm like, oh crap, I cut them off. So I'll finish my statement and I'll say, you know what, I realize I just cut you off. I want you to know I'm not trying to be ignorant in doing so. I get so excited in these kind of conversations, I tend to jump in. My intent is nothing other than I'm excited about this dialogue. That's actually going to engage the other person in the conversation. So if you're somebody who talks fast, you tend to answer more questions than ask. And again, there's a time and a place for that. Educate other people on how you best communicate, but also force yourself to find ways to slow it down a bit, because there's never been anything good that's come from jumping to conclusions. Nothing good has ever happened when you cut people off. I mean, in the short term, it might not be a big deal, but there's going to come a day where that's going to cause a problem. Somebody's going to get upset you cut them off. You're going to jump to a conclusion before you fully understood what the other person's saying. So here's some things that I do and that I advise some of my clients to do, because I deal with a lot of high energy clients. All right. So here's some things, very simple things. Number one, when somebody's speaking, force yourself not to cut them off. Consciously think in your mind, when that urge comes that you're going to jump in, catch yourself and say, hold on, no, I'm not going to do that. And if you find you're already mid-sentence by the time you realize, oh, I cut them off, say what I said before. Look, sorry, I realized I just cut you off. I'm just so, I gotta run to my next meeting, or I'm so into this conversation, or this is something I feel very passionate about, hence my level of energy. So then what you do by saying that, you'll consciously build that trigger, as Marshall Goldsmith talks about in his latest book. You'll build a trigger by which you can actually train yourself to not do it, because cutting people off is plain rude. I know it, I do it, it's a fault, and I've been working on it, and this works. The second thing is count. I mean, it sounds ridiculous, right? Somebody says something to you. Hey, Shawn, I need your opinion on this. We need to do this, this, and this. Which do you want to go for? 1,000, 2, 1,000, 3, 1,000. Thinking about that, I think the best approach is, or tell me more about that, right? Notice that counting actually at least makes it appear like I'm thinking about what you said. And what it does is it forces me to think. I mean, I'm sitting in that moment counting, but my mind's running. It's racing to, what is the best approach here? Hold on, I was going to say this, maybe it's that. So counting might seem too simple, but I'm telling you right now it works. The last one I wanted to share with you, and I just made a note here on it because it's a little bit counterintuitive. We need to work on focusing our attention. If you're somebody who speaks more than you don't, you ask less questions and tend to tell people rather than ask for their input and ideas, there's one other thing you can do, and it really comes down to focusing your attention. Now, what do I mean by focusing? You want to focus intently on something that person is doing, or something about that person. Now, I'm not suggesting you stare at them awkwardly, okay? That's not my intention here. But think about when you're speaking with that person, focus on something. Maybe it's how they're moving their hands. So right now you can see here I've got my hand moving around. Maybe, now you're not staring at my hand, but you're focused on, you're thinking about me moving my hand. Or you're focused on my facial expression. Or you're focused on something about me. Because what that does is it focuses me on the person, right? And it takes my attention from being distracted and running off in multiple directions down to you. It's almost like, if you think about it, it's like meditation. Meditation says focus on your breathing, your breath, in order to focus and to clear your mind. Well, you don't end up breathing differently. You're focusing on that, and what that does, it centers you. No different when you're speaking with somebody. Focus on something about that person. You don't have to stare at them, but focus on something that directs your attention to them. And what you'll find is you're able to slowly remove some of the outside distractions and slow yourself down. Give this a try. I can promise you it works. It might sound crazy. Again, I don't want you staring at people here, but it does actually work. So, leadership, in essence, is all about influencing other people. And you can influence people more by asking questions and by being silent and by being considerative, than you can by just telling them what you think they need to know or by talking all the time. Those leaders are typically not ones that others are drawn to. So if this is naturally who you are, if you are a talkative, high energy person, use some of these tips that I've provided you to slow yourself down, to think through what people are saying, to focus on what they're saying. And I think you're going to find that not only are you going to get some more revelations and ideas that come to you during the conversation, you're also going to be more focused on the conversation, and the people around you are going to appreciate you for it, which, my friends, is an element of influence. I want to thank you very much for your time today. Join me each and every Monday, 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, where I speak about topics related to helping CEOs and executives improve their business and improve themselves. You can feel free to email me at any time if you'd like with ideas you'd like me to speak about. It's Shawn, S-H-A-W-N, at casemoreandco.com. CASEMOREANDCO.com. That's also my website. You can check out lots of free resources there. And hey, if you haven't connected with me on Twitter, why not? It's at Shawn Casemore. Love to hear from you. Love to get a direct message about topics you'd like me to cover in future episodes. Until then, have a fantastic week, and we'll talk to you again next time. Take care.